Home care rock star Ginny Kenyon wanted to do a three-part series on how to do it right in home care. This is going to be part three. It's doing it right with your culture, and it's all about hiring, recruiting, and retention and getting all of that right. This is important.
Welcome to the Home Care Heroes and Day Service Stars podcast. If you provide services to keep older or disabled people living at home, then this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Ken Accardi.
Well, hi and welcome. This is an exciting episode of Home Care Heroes and Day Service Stars. This is the third installment of three in a very special series with Ginny Kenyon. If you're watching on YouTube and you see her on the screen, she probably looks to you like she's, in her upper 50s or something like that. But the reality is that Ginny's going to be retiring and that kind of thing. And she wanted to do this three-part series on how to do things right in your home care or home health business. And Ginny has helped to launch, she ran a home health business that also had CNAs, and she also has helped to launch countless, but at least hundreds of home health and home care agencies. She's been an authority of that on that, living in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and been a specialist in the again like Washington, Oregon, California, but as helped companies around the country, and so much experience, and she wanted to give back by doing this series. So our first one was really doing it right by the customer, and we learned an incredible lesson about that the most important thing is to find out what does the customer want to get from their services, like set goals that are meaningful to them. We had some great stories in that one. And then the next one was really doing it right as a leader, and in terms of taking care of your staff. And we had some great examples there as well, where one that kind of touched my heart was that Ginny reached out to the home health aides, and they said, well, what could I give you to do your jobs better? And they said, we want business cards. We're proud of what we do. We want to be able to show people that we work for the agency. And it turned out that they were actually giving their card out to folks they would meet in the grocery, and they were actually bringing new patients for home health or clients for home care into the organization. And that was just one of the many rich stories that came in parts one and parts two of the series. So this is the bookend. We're gonna wrap it out today, and this one I'm gonna call "Doing It Right with Culture, Hiring, and Retention." If we look at the data, right, we're gonna have four times as many people over 80 alive in this country in 20 years as compared to what we have now. And again, some people are like, oh, 65, that's when home care kicks in. Home care doesn't kick in at 65. Home care kicks in upper 70s, 80s, and that kind of thing. And the fact that we're going to have four times as many octogenarians coming around is really telling us that that our industry needs to grow and also needs to learn new ways of doing things. And so with that, I've been babbling for a long time, and I didn't even get to say hello and welcome again to part three for Ginny Kenyon.
Hi, Ken. Nice to be with you again.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's just dive right in. So, the first thing that you mentioned was culture, and how culture is the linchpin of being able to hire and retain people. So yeah, kind of tell us, like, what are some of the key lessons learned about culture?
Oh, thanks, Ken. Yeah, as all things, it's a journey, and you learn things along the way. And in the 90s, there was a real strong push by different groups. They call them learning organizations. And I was in the middle of running a large organization and realized I really needed to figure out. And part of what I told you earlier in other sessions was about how I went about learning from the staff what was important to them. But a learning organization is one that's constructed around the people themselves. And that becomes your corporate culture. And unlike everything else in an organization, the corporate culture starts at the top. And I realized that when I got really annoyed, constantly refereeing disagreements between staff. And I started doing some research and realized I may have them right when it comes to their resume, but it wasn't right or a fit with me and the people I wanted around me. And one of the things that was recommended is you sit down and really think about your core values. What's important to you? And I found out that first and foremost, as a nurse, caring and compassionate were really important to me. I wanted all my staff to be that way. I just assumed because they were a CNA or a licensed RN or a physical therapist, they would. But reality was where they might be at times. For me, it was a core value. It was always there. The other was loyal to the company. Were they just here holding, this was a placeholder and they were going to go over to the next higher paying job? That's not loyal to the company. I need people who were loyal to us, to each other. The other was dependable and reliable. If they took a shift or they took a caseload, I needed to know that I didn't have to look over their shoulder to make sure they were doing it. I found out I was terrible at that. That's not my way of operating. I hated people looking over my shoulder, and I was lousy at doing it for others. I'm not a micromanager. I wanted people who I could depend on. Once they got it, they had a case or they had a shift, they would do it, and I didn't have to worry about it. The other was respectful, and it was something I really lived by. I addressed people with respect, and I expected them to address me the same way, even when they were mad at me about something I had done. And I made it clear at the staff meetings, I said, you can walk in my office anytime if you're upset with me about anything. The only thing I require is that you be respectful, as I am respectful to you. And I want you to be respectful to your colleagues as well. When you have a disagreement about something that the two of you can't get agreement on, I'll moderate, but and again, I don't want that to happen if I don't have to. And the last thing I found, a value of mine that was really important, I believe that life is an ongoing learning. Ongoing learning. You never stop learning. And so on all evaluations, I had, what did you do this year for your learning? What courses did you take? What did you get from it? And what was of most value for you? And did you share it with everyone? Because if I was paying for it, I wanted them to share it. Those were my core values. So those were the subjective parts of the person, and those were the personality traits that everyone who worked for me had to have. And Stephen Tweak, God bless him, has a personality test that actually can tell you that. And so everyone went through that. Those core values had to be top and front center for everybody we hired. And I found out when I finally started doing that, we started getting people who really worked well with each other, learned together, reasoned together, we had a form of system thinking, team thinking, and people understood after a while, at least the clerks just learned quickly that everything they did impacted everyone around them. There was no such thing as a siloed job. We all worked together, and what one did, the others relied on. And so number one thing about your corporate culture is it has to come from you. If you're the leader, the chief person responsible, it comes from you first. And make sure the subjective content of every person you hire meets that. If you do that, you have an organization that thrives. And it was
I love
wonderful
it.
to watch them grow that way. So go ahead, you were going to ask a question,
Yeah,
Ken.
so I was going to say, I'm going to take you off track for a second, but there's a story I remember in one of your webinars that I attended quite a while back where you advised people to shop their competition and to, literally call the agency across town and, and see how they provide customer service. And, I remember at the time you had some pretty funny anecdotes of some things that you heard. But I think that that's really an indication of the culture, right? Because, if you think about it, the job of, let's say, a scheduler or a care coordinator, not the easiest job in the world. And a lot of your calls coming in are from, caregivers who are making excuses for why they didn't show up and they weren't reliable and various things like that. So, but you talked about making sure that, when the phone is answered, that, it might be a prospect and that everybody behave in a certain way. So I guess I like, for me, that story, as you were talking about your cultural, kind of the subjective things that you as a leader are looking for in a person, I think it tied to that. And I'm just kind of curious, like, do you have any memories of any of those things of, kind of cold calling the competition and, seeing what you experienced, good or bad, when you called them?
Yeah. Well, I always ask people to do that if they're really interested in starting. You got to know what your competition looks like. You can secret shop them. Um, and sometimes early on, I did that for clients. And then I knew all about their competition and they didn't. So I started teaching them how to do that. And some of the things they shared with me were interesting indeed. Um, I I heard a lot that after they called 20 or 30 agencies, that it was hard to tell one from the other. And maybe 3 or 4 of them stood out. And the things that stood out was, number one, the person who answered the phone listened
Mhm.
and responded to what they were asking for. Instead of, oh, yes, we do this and that. We have the best caregivers ever, and we do this and this and this, and they list everything they do in personal care. That's easily seen on their website if they have one, but it's not really what the customer's calling about.
Mm.
Usually when someone's calling looking for services, at least it's been my experience on the days I had to take the phones because other people who did it normally were busy or something came up. I found that what they wanted was someone who was compassionate and really was interested in hearing what was going on with them. Families, when they call, usually are in a state of semi-emergency because they just found out that mom and dad aren't doing well and they need some help at home. And you need to listen. So, and the other thing is you need to smile. And that, but there was I put a little sticky at every phone, smile. Because when you smile, when you answer the phone, it comes through. And the other thing, listening, really listen to what they're asking for. Don't inundate them with all of this and then try and immediately get them to set up an appointment with you. Listen to what they want. And if you can really fulfill what they want, you can offer that. But
Mhm.
what they're asking for. Don't give them a litany of everything you offer. And that's part of training. You should be training your people answering a phone to really listen to what the potential customers calling about. And initially, when I first started in this business, people didn't know what home care was. They didn't know what we did. And it was not uncommon to get phone calls for people wanting to have someone come in and enlarge the entrance into the bathroom because a wheelchair couldn't get through, or they needed a ramp, or they needed grab bars put on. And initially, of course, I would say, well, we really don't do that. And then it dawned on me, that's not customer service and it's not helping people who really are looking for something. And when we kept getting those phone calls, and I did have phone locks at every phone. So anybody who answered the phone had to put down who called, what it was about, what they did about it, and any follow-up that needed to happen. The director of clinical services gathered those up on Thursday. On Friday morning, we had management team, and she would report any trending requests. And when we kept getting those requests, I turned to the management team and said, should we subcontract with a construction firm to do these kinds of things? And by then I'd already brought about 4 or 5 other things to them that they had said yes to. And they all looked at me and said, no, no, no more, Jenny. Our plate's full. No. I said, okay,
Yeah.
fine. But remember, we don't ever say no when we answer the phone. We say we don't do it here, but here are 3 names you can call. See if those can help you. If not, call us back and we'll keep looking till we can find someone who can help you. So I said to them, all right, have 3 vetted construction firms or handymen that can do this, because we don't ever say no. And by Wednesday of the next week, we had our list. So when we met on Friday, I had that list already presented to me. Well, I knew they'd already done it because
Yeah,
I've
that's
heard.
fantastic. You've kind of interested. I mean, we're going on tangent after tangent here, but you've given me an interesting idea. So, most at Ancota, most of our customers are home care agencies, with caregivers, but we have some customers that are either called an area agency on aging, so kind of a referral
Mhm.
organization that's helping, and or a center for independent living, which is a similar skill set, but helping um, for people with uh, disabilities, whether it be intellectual, developmental, physical disabilities, helping them get resources. And, they have programs that they run, but then they also, a lot of times their role is to be like, hey, I need help with a wheelchair, where do I go? So in our home care software, we have this whole resources section where you could, search by keywords and keep a list of that. But we've never really offered it to our, kind of home care agencies so they could, have the best construction contractors and, somebody who could help with a handicap ramp or those types of things. So good idea for me. All right, but hey, I pulled you out of your stride there. So, you kind of took us through the great things that are part of your culture, the lifetime learning, being respectful, dependable, and loyal to the company and those kinds of things. And so, really, I mean, our hardest job here these days with the numbers are that there's so many people who need care and a growing number, and then there's fewer and fewer people who are of the age and demographics who want to deliver care. So how do we take those cultural elements and how do we tie them into our hiring?
Well, hiring is hard. Any way you get around it, getting the right people in your organization is hard. And when you overlay the personality traits that were important to me, it gets harder. Fewer people match it, or at least it seemed like it initially. But then what I found is when we hired right, by that I mean we hired people who felt the same way about their jobs, who were loyal and were dependable and reliable and respectful and caring and compassionate,
Mhm.
had friends who were like them, and they referred them over. And initially, I started giving a referral bonus, and then I found out it wasn't necessary. They were going to
Mm.
refer the people that they wanted to be able to work with because they worked as a team. They wanted people who were like them. I found out I wanted people like me, and they wanted people like them. We all wanted people that we could work with comfortably, that we could depend on, and we knew we're going to take really good care of our patients and each other, back each other up when was needed. That's another thing. That aides, for reasons sometimes beyond their control, have to call off a shift. So do
Mhm.
nurses. We needed to know that there were others out there who were willing to step up to the plate and back them up. And they did. And for the Medicare home health side, I broke the territory into 4 big teams, but they had borders they could slide over. If that team next door couldn't handle the overload that came in last week, they would be willing to slide over and help pick it up. It became, uh, and it wasn't a hassle, and they didn't feel put upon because they knew that team would slide over and do it for them when they got in a bind. So it was this respect for each other, this loyalty to each other, knowing we were all in the same team. Or well, we were all in the same company on different teams, but we all worked together. And the biggest change actually happened in the back office, to tell you the truth, when they learned that um, they were valued for everything they did. They weren't clerks. They were an integral part of our company, integral part. And everything they did, we relied on. And I think it was that understanding that everybody's important in the organization. And when I finally started hiring people who matched my skill set, my value set. everybody was pretty much on that same page, it really made a difference in the organization. So when problems came, we could sit down and solve them together. I did have a sign on my door. I finally got the point. I'm not mother. If you have a problem, come with solutions. They would laugh about it after a while, but it was this constant where they come to me because they had a problem and they wanted me to tell them how to do it. Well, that's not what a learning organization is. We solve our problems together. Um, and they'd come in and say, we have a problem with this. And I said, what do you think we ought to do? And they'd give me their list of things they thought we ought to do. And then the next question would be, all right, if we do that, what are the outcomes going to be? Well, this and this and this is going to happen. I said, what might happen that we don't want to have happen? That they had to stop and think about, because there's no such thing as an absolutely perfect solution. Every solution has its benefits and not benefits. And I want to mitigate those not benefits as much as possible. And that was another thing we learned together. We learned to problem solve and mitigate as much as possible the side effects we didn't want to have happen. But it was a team shared. I didn't do that. I didn't have to do that. It was a shared team, shared learning, shared thinking. And when we had problems, when we had team meetings, we did always have team meetings once a month with everybody in the organization. And for the Medicare site, they had to have team meetings every week by team. And if one team was having an issue and the other teams found out about it, we found out it was probably the same thing with all the teams. So we brought them all together and shared what was going on, and then they solved it together. And because it was a shared solving, there was nothing I had to impose. It was theirs. They owned it. I just said, fine. If their issues come out, please let us know so we can get together and solve again. It was wonderful. I didn't have to look over shoulders. I didn't have to ask, are they doing their job right? Are you having trouble with people keeping their shifts? I didn't have to do that anymore. It
Yeah.
was such a relief. And I love that your software does that. Yes, you should be sharing that with your customers, because finding resources for people is critical. It's a customer service thing that's critical to success. And what I found out is maybe we didn't have the contractors to go in and do those widening of the doors or putting up grab bars or building the ramps. But because we helped them when they needed personal care at home, they called us because we were the resource that they relied on when they needed something. So
Yeah.
it's,
Well, I remember in one of the earlier series, you talked about how you your team took it upon themselves and said, when you to a hospital team, when you have a discharge for somebody who needs home care, we'll take care of it, even if we're not the right agency to deliver it. And as a result of that, I mean, you got the referrals, and then you were also, when it was, let's say, geographically or whatever, for whatever reason, it wasn't in your wheelhouse, you were still taking care of that for the hospital. It's like, oh, we can't handle this one. But you're like, yeah, but I know the best people, and that helped you, build um, relationships with other organizations in your community, and even your competitors became, cooperators or co-opetition, I guess they say. So that worked out really well. So, as I'm sure you've heard some of the episodes that you haven't been on Home Care Heroes, and obviously the topics of recruiting and retention, come up frequently. And, so I guess three come to mind. So we've, um, just the last episode that went out was Bob Roth, and Bob from
oh
Cypress
yeah,
Home Care.
yeah,
He actually talked about some crazy, new AI that he's using that, helps them to screen candidates, refresh the posts online and things like that. But he never takes his eye off the fact that it's a people business. And so he says, all right, well, if they screen, then, that first interview is going to be no more than 5 minutes on like a Zoom call, but it's all about, is that person giving me a good impression and that sort of thing. And then he ultimately, when they make the finalists, it's all about, seeing the last people who finally decide whether they're going to work in the company or not, the care coordinators, because that's who they're going to work with, getting things done. So it was like Bob giving, a diatribe about how he's using AI in his organization. It is saving him lots of time. It summarized the notes, it screened out candidates,
Yeah.
but everything is about a people business. And then, like another one that comes to mind, young guy, I'm not sure if you know Nick, but Nick Bonatonopoulos, he's somebody who, works a real lot. He's like a video marketer and that, specializes in home care. And he is usually the master of ceremonies when Steve the Hurricane has one of his conferences and things like that. And, and he talks about, how your website should be more for recruiting candidates, caregiver candidates than it should be, um, for even recruiting clients, because, if you get the caregivers, you're going to get the clients. And, he really talks about, having the culture and that, if your clients come to your website and they see stories of happy caregivers that are, telling great things that they were able to achieve with their clients, that's going to make them want to come to your agency. So I think it all ties together, whether we're talking about, video marketing, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or, um, I mean, you were a consultant for a long time, and before you ran your agency, or when you ran your agency, you didn't have Chat GPT, and you probably weren't, putting YouTube shorts up and posting your things on TikTok. But everything that you just told us today is really, really on point. So thank you for that. Right. Well, I love that you always have, like maybe one, like, can you think of any other like stories that come to mind? Like one last story we should cover here on recruiting, retention. I guess another thing that you caught my eye with earlier was you said that, you were paying a retention bonus, and then, like they were so happy to bring their friends into the organization, you didn't need to do it. I guess I've heard a lot of other people say that, you should up your retention bonus because look at how much you're spending otherwise, for somebody who maybe came through Indeed and doesn't have that loyalty to the company, that dependability and all that, and they're going through your training and your recruiting and then they leave, whereas, the people who are referred by your employees are making such a big difference. So this is really hitting home. But yeah, what else? What else do you want to tell us?
Well, the building the culture right, when I finally got it right, I didn't have trouble recruiting anymore. Like I said, people were referring their friends who they trusted. They didn't refer just anybody. They only referred people they really trusted. But when you're in that thing I found out, and mind you, I was working in a big international corporation at the time with that big office. And when I finally realized all this stuff, and they had 400 and some branches in the United States. I had one of the highest retention rates in the whole company. And it was because we had a culture where we were family. We worked together. We trusted each other. We relied on each other. And they did that together. Did I set the tone? I did. But they did it together because they took it in and they made that a reality in their everyday working with each other. And that was the success of building a corporate culture where everybody was part of it, everybody was valued. Um, and because people were valued, they didn't go to a company that was paying more. And there was a couple times when people would say to me that someone so and so was trying to recruit them, and they were offering so much money, and I said, that why are you staying here? They're offering a lot more money. They said, because this is where I belong.
Mhm.
I belong here. Then I knew we'd made it right. They felt they belonged, and they did. They belonged, and everybody who worked there felt like they belonged. And the only reason they left, uh, that we had several aides and a couple of clerks who left. Their husbands were in the military. We were right next door to Fort Lewis. And when they got transferred to another part of the country or world, they had to leave. And in their, we always did exit interviews to find out why people were leaving. And what I found out, they were leaving not because they wanted to. They left because their husbands were being transferred and they
Sure.
kind of had to go with them. Uh, it was nice to read their comments. This was the best place I ever worked, and I'm sorry to leave it. But my husband's been reassigned to Germany, and so we'll be heading there next month. And so, it's build your corporate culture, build it from what your values are, and then hire people who share it. And then you're going to have teams that work together, that have team learning and team thinking, where they solve the problems together. They're not at my door all the time wanting me to fix it for them. I couldn't fix it. I wasn't in the field. I didn't always know what the exact problems were. I could guess, but sometimes I wasn't right. So trust your people to know what's really going on with their work. And when they come to you with an issue, ask them how to solve it. I didn't have the best answers usually. I thought I did initially, but I found out I never really did. They always had the best answers, and they knew how to solve it. The part they didn't always think about is what things would happen they didn't want to have happen. So that was part of our problem solving, learning it together. So first of all, set your culture to match, hire people to match, work with each other as family, as teams, and then move ahead. Move ahead and my company went from a 1.3 million to a 5.3 or 1.2 to 5.3 in 18 months. That was the team effort that did that. The revenue flowed in, and the gentleman who was our chief executive officer at CEO at the time, Lloyd Hill, said, take care of your people. They'll take care of everything else. And boy, does it. But first set your culture right, and then it will work.
I love it. Okay, and that actually, when we started the very first episode in the series about, really getting it right with your clients, you also referenced Lloyd and some of the important lessons that he had taught you. Okay, well, thank you first of all for reaching out and saying you want to do this three-part series. I think that the listeners are going to enjoy it a lot and learn a lot from it, and maybe be reminded of, of places where they've slipped away from the core values that are so important to them. And I think you're going to ground them on that really well. So let me just really quickly recap for the third podcast time here that Ginny's website, even though she wanted to do this, she's not leaving yet, right? So the website is Kenyon, KenyonHCC.com. So think of it like Kenyon Home Care Consulting, but KenyonHCC.com. And then the website to sometimes you actually get Ginny to catch you live, but for the company is going to be area code 206-721-5091. And just because, Ginny, you reached out and you said, you're wanting to leave this, this three-part series because you want to, pay it forward and do something nice with this. This doesn't mean this is the last time you're going to be on the podcast. I'm not sure we're going to let you off the hook that easily, but I definitely appreciate this three-part series. And thank you one more time to Miss Ginny Kenyon.
Well, thank you, Ken, for hosting it. It's a pleasure. I think elders in our business ought to share what they've learned over time. It's not been an easy journey for any of you either. I know you've had your ups and downs, same as me. And anything we can pass on to those coming ahead. And like you say, more and more people are going to need care. And it's really important that we build businesses that can actually deliver it in a really quality way. So thank you for letting me share. And we'll get together again sometime and talk about other things that is impacting our businesses and our worldwide interests. So thank you, Ken.
All right. Thank you, Ginny.
Thanks for joining us today on the Home Care Heroes and Days Service Stars podcast, produced by Ancoda. You can listen to back episodes by visiting 4homecareheroes.com. That's the number 4, then the words homecareheroes.com.